Hi and welcome to my third video in the CodeIgniter tutorial series. If you're watching these in sequence, and I hope you are because they do all follow on, at the end of the second video I left you with a page looking much like this one, and we were dealing with the template parser library. One of the points that I made in the last video was that the code in the template parser itself left us with a little bit of a gotcha. The problem was that if we wanted now to click on these links and go through to a page that allowed us to read the contents of the linked article, the problem would be that this code shown here would need to change in some way, because obviously that layout isn't going to work when we want to view just a single article. So the issue being that we don't want all of this stuff, we literally just want the article to display. So in the last video I suggested that we'd have to create a different template. Well, actually we don't need to do that. What we can do instead is introduce the concept of a partial. If you've worked with Ruby on Rails at all, then you'll be very familiar with the idea of partials. Really all they are is the equivalent of a sort of include file, which allows you to include sections of code that typically are common to the application as a whole. So for example, the main menu you might choose to include in a partial, or any content basically that's going to appear consistently within the layout. But we can employ them successfully to our main template so that we can continue to use the same base template code but change certain sections. And the way I'm proposing that we do this is by making an assessment in the controller of what particular page we happen to be looking at. And we can do this by employing the URI segment from CodeIgniter's built-in URI library that allows us to look at the segments of a URL and determine from the first segment whether or not there's an actual value set. So in other words, when we're looking at this URL, there is no first segment, it's not set. So what's going to happen is we're going to load a partial file called home. So in order to do that, what I've done is I've created in the views folder, I've created a subfolder called partials, and I've created a file called home. So what we've got in this file is the same code that we originally had in the template, which is this code here. So that's the code that was in the template originally, and it's now been moved into this view partial. And the idea is that you can see what's happening here. It's a very simple check to see if the first segment of the URL is set, then we'll actually load the or at least a path that determines the path to the partial we want to load. However, that's not the end of the job. We know that the data array is passed to the template through this this section here. What we need to do in the template itself, though, is rather than have the actual variables that we used to have in place, instead we'll load a view. Except the view links through to the variable that we're using in our controller, content, maps onto content here in the array that we're passing through to the view, because remember the template is effectively still just a view. So what that means is that CodeIgniter will then load partials home, which is partials home. It will load that file instead, and that's exactly what you can see in the browser right there. Nothing's changed, in other words. What I've effectively done is I've maintained the same layout that we had at the end of the last video, but this time the central content is being loaded from the partial. So that's going to work for the home page. What happens when we click these links? What should happen is that the layout changes and everything else remains the same, just the layout in the middle section changes to read an article. How does that work? And also there's one other thing we need to address, which is this route or this path is different, and that's because I've set a CodeIgniter route to achieve that. I'll get to that in a moment. First of all, let's see what's happening here. View article is the name of a new method in the controller. We see it here. And what I've done is I've created a new template section, or a new template partial, called _article viewer. The underscore, by the way, is just a way to indicate that this is a partial file rather than a regular file. And technically I should have named home as _home to keep the naming consistent. But anyway, the idea of this is that article viewer, which we can see here, is in itself its own sub-template. So it works the same way as the home partial does, in that it's got the variables for replacement, just as we did before, as I explained in the second video. And article viewer then has got the same idea. It's got variables that are going to be replaced, so that we can see that we're still maintaining title, because that's part of the main template. That refers to page title here, so that needs to stay consistent. But then we've got heading and article, which corresponds with heading and article in the article viewer page. And then we've got content, which is of course the variable that we need in main template to load the view. So content, if you remember, is the variable that we're loading here. So what that means is that now when we come to view article, we're still doing the same thing as in the index method of the welcome controller, in the sense that we're still using the template library. And the particularly nice thing about this solution is that we're still using the same main template file. We don't actually now need to create another template file. By using this particular solution, we can just vary what we're loading by assigning the view that we want to load to the content variable in the array. So that's a very brief and simple introduction to the way that we can create partials with CodeIgniter. Now there's more that we can do, and in the next video I'm going to explain how we can use partials for the left and right columns too. But the next thing we must deal with is, if you look carefully at what's going on here, you'd expect this particular link or this path to say for mysite.dev/welcome/view_article, and it doesn't. I've reduced it down just to view article. And the reason I've been able to do that is because I've set a route. We can find the routes file in config routes, and you can see here that what I've done is I've simply created a route that says view article. So any calls to view article should actually map to welcome view article. And all it means is that a path such as that in the URL will resolve to welcome view article, which of course, as you've I'm sure already established, will arrive at the correct method in our controller. So to recap then, what we've done is we've created some view partials. In the main template, we've created a load view, which is the standard way to load a view in CodeIgniter, but instead of an actual view file, we're passing in a variable. By doing that, in the two methods that we now have in the controller, we're able to populate that variable with the partial that we actually want to load. and in the index controller we've set up a simple test to see if the first segment of the URI is set. If it isn't, we're assuming that we must be on the home page, and so we load the home page template. Otherwise, in this instance here, we know that we're now on a separate section, a new method in the controller, if you will, and that means that we can load a separate part of the template. That means that, and we will in fact in later videos continue to develop this app, and that means that we can use the same idea and do the same thing to achieve loading different pages into the same template. So I think that's just about it for this video. See you next time.